SoulWorker is a hub MMO that began development originally as SoulWorker Online, developed by Lion Game Studios and released originally in Japan in 2016 and globally in 2018. You take on the role of one of numerous middle school students as you do battle against powerful void monsters in an attempt to save the world from total and utter destruction, all while simultaneously navigating your own teen hormones. What could go wrong? A lot. A lot could go wrong. You begin your adventure into SoulWorker by selecting one of 10 classes. Well, I say classes, but they're characters with predefined class archetypes. You have characters that wield great swords, guns, scythes, spears. Every class has their own distinct playstyle and uses. One area I think that SoulWorker really excels is its lack of a holy trinity. Every class is a DPS, with some classes favoring more of a support or damage specialization. Regardless, every class is completely self-sufficient, which means that if you suck, if you die, if you're gated from progressing, it's because you're bad at the game. Nobody can complain that their tank or their healer sucks because there are technically none present. You're your own tank, you're your own healer. I opted to go with Lee Navi due to her absolutely enormous gun. You're greeted to a character's specific introduction to the game before finally gaining control, with every character's unique story being exclusive to them, but overlapping with other characters' overall goals. As an example, at no point in the game did MMOSSTIX and I ever have the same quest or the same quest objectives. Yet, we would enter the same zones, we would kill the same monsters, eliminate the same boss monsters, and continue our own individual quest chains independent of one another together. It's a unique way of allowing players to consume content together, while also allowing them entirely different narrative experiences. This is a feature that I wish more MMOs utilized. It adds a layer of character or class identity. After a short intro to your class, you appear in one of several locations. Older characters spawn in the first town, I think it was Rocco Town, and follow a story that leads you through several different regions and villains. Selecting one of the newer classes leads you through a short scenario, immediately bypassing the majority of the lower leveling experience. Within minutes of logging in, I was level 45. This means that if you're starting the game for the very first time and you opt to play with a friend, you're either forced into both playing one of the newer characters or the older. This severely limits your ability to play what you want and is actually very disappointing. There are definitely pros and cons to skipping through a lot of the early game. On the one hand, the lower level story is bad. Nope, scratch that. The entire narrative in SoulWorker is bad. It's almost like you're playing through an episode of Scooby-Doo. The villains are laughable, the quest text is convoluted, and you can't help but skip through it. A common practice in the MMO genre, to our dismay. However, skipping 45 levels of the game means that you're immediately presented with 45 levels worth of content, abilities, and features, with no explanation of what any of them mean or how any of them work. This is overwhelming and left MMOSSTIX looking for a guide for her character, so she didn't invest into the wrong abilities, where I just YOLO'd it and hoped for the best. Every character has their own skills, and as you continue to level, you gain additional skill points to distribute. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory. Do you want big damage? Then go for the big boom skills. Large AoE coverage? Then go for the big splash skills. Beyond active skills, there are passive skills that provide base statistical boosts to either your character overall or aspect of your character's abilities. These passive abilities are further magnified by the inclusion of masteries. Masteries are additional passive boosts that you utilize to further increase your power, increasing things like critical strike, evasion, skill damage, HP. The entire skill and mastery system is fairly deep and complex, and as a new player with absolutely no knowledge of how to build your character the correct way, I can see it being impossible to fully grasp in any meaningful length of time, anyway. Now, before I delve any deeper into SoulWorker, I want to take a moment here to thank my incredible patrons over on Patreon, who allow for me to continue to do dedicated videos on MMOs like this every single week. You guys are incredible, and I cannot thank you all enough for your support. Now let's get back to SoulWorker. After spending a half hour trying and failing to set up our characters effectively, MMOSSTIX and I partied up and departed on our adventure together by running over to the glowing red portal and selecting a stage to enter. As I noted earlier, SoulWorker is a hub MMO. What this means is that there are several central hubs that exist and you occupy, where you'll chat with other players, you will buy and sell items or gear, group up and attempt to tackle content. It's like an open world, only it's not open. Thankfully, SoulWorker actually possesses numerous town hubs, each with their own distinct aesthetic. The beach, downtown, ruins. It helps a little bit with the monotony that you're forced to suffer through when you spend hours or days in the same little area, only leaving to enter small linear zones and a few waves of enemies. The bulk of SoulWorker takes the form of dungeon crawling, where you queue for a dungeon, a level, a zone, either solo or with other players. You fight several groups of enemies across numerous different screens, engage a boss in the final screen, and then leave, complete your mission, and redeploy to repeat ad nauseum. So that's what we did. We grouped up, queued for a dungeon, spent a half hour running through train stations. We happened upon what we believed was a nice neighborhood to just rest a little bit in, only to see it was overrun with those things. Then after an hour and a half spent parading around 3 different regions, we came across a first sign of life. So Fatal, another player who weirdly enough began putting on a little bit of a show for us. Not that I'm judging, kind of enjoyed it a little bit. Over the next several days, Fatal would be one of a mere handful of other people we would encounter in SoulWorker, which is a stark contrast to when I last played in 2022, or at least I think it was 2022. The next 3 hours were painfully uneventful. We continued our own respective stories. We ran through dozens of different levels, completing what seemed like at least 100 different quests, and by the end of day 1 had attained level 58. We had spent over 4 hours playing, and we were so fatigued that we wanted to stop playing the game altogether. All we had done for almost 4 hours straight was take a quest from an NPC, run to the portal, teleport in, kill several waves of the same monster, one-shot a boss, leave, talk to the same NPC, re-enter, rinse and repeat. This is not a fun gameplay loop. By providing this level skip, not only did they overwhelm me with features and abilities, but they also gifted me an item box that continues to provide you powerful gear every X number of levels, preventing you from ever falling behind and allowing you to continue to clear content without issue. But in doing this, it meant that we were always severely overpowered, removing any potential challenge that would have been present otherwise. Day 2 started with much less enthusiasm than day 1. We knew what there was to expect, and after hours of trying to stay awake, we happened across another player. Much like Fatal, Tots was the same class that I chose. There's probably a reason for that, not entirely certain what that reason could be. Maybe she just has a really large personality. After several hours of playing, we made it to level 60 and decided we were too bored to play anymore. This is not the desired effect of playing a video game. We play video games as an escape from reality. It's something fun, or at the very least entertaining, with the goal of occupying us. Over 7 hours, we weren't a single time entertained. Occupied? Sure, but staring at paint dry is another way to occupy yourself and would result in roughly similar levels of enjoyment. At the very least, the combat in SoulWorker is fun and the graphics are pleasant to look at. They always have been. SoulWorker employs an action combat system where you don't require a target for abilities. Granted, you do need to be within a danger zone, a dungeon, to even pull out your weapon, but once within an instance, you can freely swing, slash, and dodge. SoulWorker was always one of my favorite anime MMOs for this very reason. It had what was arguably the best action combat system in an anime MMO, not that there was really a whole lot of competition comparatively. Your character moves effortlessly, fluidly, weaving abilities with beautiful special effects that at times encompass the entire screen. But you don't possess very many abilities. You can equip 6 in total, with each ability allowing you to equip successive abilities activated as part of a chain. This allows you to expand beyond the default 6, but it always felt as though combat would have better benefited from either more hotbars or specific keybinds to activate abilities. Several days into playing, I decided it was time to look into the cash shop, as I was curious the kinds of outfits that were present. They did not disappoint, which was quite the surprise to me, as everything up until this point, dozens of hours spent in game, left me with a severe case of disappointment. MRSSSTIX and I streamed SoulWorker over 3 weeks, and not a single time were we impressed by what we played. This was one of my favorite MMOs just a few years ago, and seeing the desolate, rushed mess that it has become is absolutely depressing. You're given an endless surplus of powerful gear for no reason at all, and therefore any sense of reward, any satisfaction that you would have obtained through acquiring the gear isn't present. There's nobody around, there's nobody playing, there's nobody leveling. Even running back to earlier zones, there was a noticeable lack of players. I cannot believe the state that the game is in, and I'm a little disgusted that this is what it has devolved into. I wish I could say that this was an MMO worth playing, but it genuinely and wholeheartedly is not. Now, if SoulWorker is not an MMO that you're at all interested in, absolutely no problem. Take a moment here to check out one of the 2 videos on screen right now.